The very first thing that we're going to do is download Blender. And we're going to go ahead and get the latest version of Blender by going to blender.org. You do not want to go to blender.com or anything else. You want to download Blender at blender.org so that way you're not accidentally downloading malicious software. So you're going to go here to the download and you can download Blender. And Blender does work with Mac and Linux, but we are going to be doing everything in Windows. So pretty much all of our hotkeys and everything like that is going to be done in Windows. But you should know that everything that we're going to do can be done on Mac or Linux, depending on your preferences. So we're going to go ahead and download the latest version of Blender and get that rolling. And then another thing is that I'm going to be using Blender version 4.4 for the time being, just because I haven't updated mine yet. But it really doesn't matter what version. It just matters that you have the latest version. So while those things are downloading, or after you go ahead and get those things set up, we are actually going to go ahead and go back over to Studio. So we're doing this assuming that you already know how to use Studio and that you already have models in Studio that you're ready to rig. If you don't, then I would highly suggest looking up some Studio tutorials and start building some stuff in Studio. It's really easy to use. It's a great program, really great accuracy. They have a lot of parts, and that's what we're going to be using today to take our model and put it in Blender. Now, in order to do that, there are some rules that we need to follow. Rule number 1 is no submodels. So as you can see here, all of our parts are not submodels. They're all individually listed. And the reason why we don't want to do that is because whenever we export this and then import this into Blender, Blender is going to treat those submodel parts as if they were individual parts, and we don't want that, and it's going to put them in weird places, and it'll be just a pain to put back together. So do not have any submodels when you're exporting this out of Studio. So that is rule number 1, and it's very important. The next rule is you only want to do one color. So I know a lot of people have like parts that are like all different colors and stuff like that, and that's fine. But the thing is that when you're exporting this and then importing it into Blender, it's going to take all of that color data and material data and then import it into Blender, but Blender's not going to know what it is. So it'll still just come out white with no material or anything like that. And now you have all this data that you don't need, that you're going to have to throw away to make your file size smaller. So to skip all of that, we're just going to do one color for the entire model. And when we do put it in Blender, we're going to go over on how to color your model once we actually get it all together and everything. The next the next rule is every model needs to be in a T-pose. So you can do an A pose if you really want to, but to be honest with you, it is so much easier to rig in a T-pose. It just makes things a lot easier. And then you want all of your limbs to be like perfectly straight. You don't want any weird angles or anything like that. Like, you want them to be perfectly straight, and that goes for all of your limbs. And again, this is just going to make it so much easier to rig once we get it into Blender. Another thing is that if your model is symmetrical, you need to make sure that all of your, like, both sides of your model is 100% symmetrical. So from what I understand, sometimes whenever you copy and mirror stuff, it doesn't quite put the parts where they need to go. It's kind of funky sometimes, and so what I recommend is not using the copy and mirror tool down here in Studio, and I would recommend just building one side and then building the other side, because for whatever reason, if you build both sides, they turn out to be more even than if you were to just copy and mirror. I have no idea why it does that. It does that for me all the time, and it bugs me. I don't know, but that's just something that I've ran into. So the other thing is if you have anything like a tube or a wire or a hose, let me see if I can find one here. I know we've got some here somewhere. Let's see, I'm trying to find these guys. This is what I was looking for. So if you have something like this, or anything like these guys up here, like these guys here. If you have anything like these things, you need to make sure that they're straight. You do not want them to have any bends in them whatsoever. So, you can move these parts in Studio, but if you have a model that uses these parts as like accessories or like hair or something like that, or like part of a weapon, these need to be straightened out. So they should not have any bends in them whatsoever. So if you have a model that's using this kind of tubing in a spine, kind of like this, you can, and especially if it's bent, because on the model, on the real life model of this particular figure, the spine is like bent in a little bit. So if it's like that, in your model, that's fine. You can leave it like that. Granted, this is a much more complicated model, and this kind of model we are not going to be covering in the Quick Start series, but this is something I will be covering later on. But if you do have parts like this, that's totally fine. But if you have any of these pieces, like these guys here, but they're dangling off as like hair or they're part of a weapon, they need to be straightened out, because what we're going to do is we're going to rig them up, well, eventually, probably not in this Quick Start series, but later on we're going to go over and how we can rig these up in a sort of like chain and make them animatable. So, but yeah, those two parts, or that rule is definitely important, because if they're not straight, it's a lot harder to rig them. The next thing is that if you do have weapons or accessories, they need to be next to the model. So anything that is like considered a weapon or any kind of accessory that isn't attached to the model needs to be next to the model. Now, you do not have to export them separately. You could if you really wanted to, but you don't have to, because once we import everything, we'll be able to set it up in its own layer and everything like that, and that's not really going to be a huge deal. So the last rule is good practices. And so when you're building models in Studio, it's a very good practice to use parts that are similar. What do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you a great example. Sometimes whenever you're building a mock, you tend to use parts that look similar, but they're actually different. So for example, there's 4 different kinds of these Modahan pieces now. So you have this one, and you have this one, and these two look very similar, but they actually have different data, obviously, because they have different part numbers. But basically, what people will do is they'll use this piece, but somewhere along the way while they're building, they'll use this piece. So the reason why that's bad is because whenever we import this model into Blender, we want more of one or the other piece, so that way Blender groups them together. And what that basically does, and I will definitely show this later when we get into Blender, what that does is that when you edit one part, it'll edit all of the other parts at the same time. So you don't have to do that. So if you reduce the amount of unique pieces in your model, it will save you a considerable amount of time, so that you can spend more time doing things that are more important. So yeah, so a good practice is definitely to use similar pieces or like pieces, so that way it's a little bit easier to mess around with in Blender. And it goes the same thing with these pin pieces. There's like 3 different kinds of these, and if I edit this one, it'll automatically edit this one, but if these 2 were different, it wouldn't edit them. So I would highly recommend before exporting to go through your model and see how many unique pieces that you can reduce by just replacing them with another piece that's already similar. So anyway, that's pretty much it. Those are pretty much all of the rules that you need to follow as far as your Studio model. And pretty much all these rules are kind of set in place so that it just makes it a ton easier to work with once we're actually in Blender. So before we move on over to Blender, we have to export Stormer here, which, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, yes, we are using Stormer 2.0 for this project. And the reason why that is because he's very simple. He's got fewer parts, and it'll just be a lot easier and faster for us to go through it without spending too much time fiddling with all the mesh and everything like that. So I will say this is a modified version. This is actually technically my version. I have a real life version of this figure that I have, and I decided to build him in a studio so that we can go ahead and rig him. All right, so we need to export him. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to File, and we're going to go Export as Collada. Now, the default selection that Studio typically has already selected is what you see here. So do not include logo, clockwise, and right-handed. I've noticed that for whatever reason, whenever you import it like this into Blender, it imports it upside down, and we don't want that. So we're going to go ahead and switch this to counterclockwise and left-handed, and it'll still look a little funky, but at least it won't be upside down. So, and then you can include the logo if you really want to. I don't recommend it because that's just extra geometry that we're not really going to see. So, it doesn't really matter. So we're going to do not include the logo. And then we're going to export. So what you're going to want to do is find your folder that you want to put these in. And I've actually already got one. So, so you can export it however you want, and then you just hit save and you're ready to go. So without further ado, let's go ahead and switch over to Blender.